for another episode of learning stuff about the American government. We are now on American government from the textbook, Chapter 11 on the Congress. And this really is a jam packed chapter with a lot of information. There will be a lot of exam questions from this chapter. So, again, even though I'm moving through these things quickly, the expectation is that we're reading, we're asking questions in class, and again, remember, I'm not covering everything that you will be tested on in this material. This is just kind of a way for you to have access to a lecture throughout the week, and then we can talk about these things in our class. So keep that in mind. So let's see if my mouse is working. I think it is. So in terms of the pictures here, we just have the seals of the Senate, the U.S. Senate here on the left of the paper if you're looking at it, if you're able. In the middle of the page is the seal for the House of Representatives. And then the right with the building outside with the blue sky in the background is the U.S. Capitol building, right? And this is where both of these chambers of the legislature meet, right? So it's the actual building, right? So if you ever go to D.C., that's what that building is. So again, just moving through this. This is the legislative body, meaning the Congress of the U.S. federal government. This means that the elected members of these institutions made and still make laws of the country. They are only bound by the parameters set forth by the Constitution and the amendments, which are really parts of the Constitution. The framers of the Constitution intended to make Congress a cornerstone of the new government. So hopefully I've already said this in class, but and again, this is up for your opinion, but in many ways we can view Congress, and again, hopefully I've said this, as being the most powerful branch of government. So I think oftentimes when we're going to have a chapter on the president, people will think, oh, it's the president. And that's a fair point. But at the end of the day, Congress controls the purse strings or controls the money. So not just raising money, but like what happens to that money in the government. And so to me, that's what makes them the most powerful. And that's why there's kind of inherent check and balance of there being two parts. So all the way back in Federalist 51 that some of you did for that first homework, that's why Madison talks about, going to have the legislature broken up into two parts, right? So there's not two presidents, there's not two Supreme Court justices, but there are two different legislative bodies in the U.S. or the U.S. Congress, excuse me. The modern Congress arose out of the failures of the Articles of Confederation. So again, now we're on midterm stuff still, but again, you're still expected to know it so much as it's relevant to this material, if that makes sense. So we're not going to have old questions, but it doesn't change the fact that the Articles of Confederation are important. You should know what they are. Much of what we observed regarding Congress was the development of the Connecticut Compromise. Right? So I won't go through this stuff again, but you should know it. A constitutional convention to replace the Articles. The obvious feature that resulted from this compromise was the creation of a bicameral, key term here, bicameral legislative body. This means that Congress was divided into two parts, as I just already said. Right, so a key check in power is that whatever bills the two houses of government pass, they have to be identical. So as I'm recording this, Congress is dealing with COVID and more funding for COVID relief efforts. And there kind of have been a several week-long stalemate because they cannot agree on the same terms. Right? So the two different parties have different bills. One party right now, the Democrats, control the House of Representatives, and another party, the Republicans, control the Senate. So again, as frustrating as that is, that's by design. It's kind of slow process that forces people to compromise. And that's also what makes our politics contentious when they do get contentious. Why is passing identical legislation institutionally important? This obstacle to passing laws makes it less likely that Congress will act emotionally or without necessary deliberation. So you want to make sure they know how much things are going to cost, how they're going to implement them before they say, here's a goal, we're going to meet it. This makes the large-scale dramatic reform exceptionally difficult to pass, and this makes the status quo more likely to win out. And again, many of you are probably frustrated by that, but that's by design. I think it's a good thing, but you're allowed to disagree with me. It makes it difficult for a single political party or interest to pass laws that would favor it, right? So again, like this is like something that we've talked about with regards to California in our direct democratic process, and we talked about our legislature, that it's pretty much just a Democrat Party stronghold, right? So the Democratic Party kind of just votes for policies that it wants and it likes, and there really isn't much meaningful pushback at the state level in this state. So then here we have the House or Representatives. We all usually call these people Congress people. This is a picture of the floor of the House of Representatives, right? So this is where like the president will do the State of the Union. The Speaker of the House has to invite the president, and they usually stand in front of this big chair, and the Speaker will sit in this big chair during such events, right? The numbers of a representative state is a portion, or that means the ones they have or are given, is dependent upon the population of that state. This is why the U.S. Census, which I actually just had a person come ask me questions, and it only took like 5 minutes. Really nice lady. U.S. Census is such a big deal and constitutionally required. The population the census determines a state currently to have will determine how many House seats a state has after and until the next census. So every 10 years is why the census is such a political and big deal. Because who counts and how you count them is going to determine actual political power. So that's why if you're like, why is the census such a big deal? That's why it's a big deal. And it's constitutionally required. So you're required to have a census in the United States, legally speaking, from the Constitution. To serve in the House of Representatives, a person must be a citizen for at least 7 years and 25 years of age. Elections for a House seat are held every 2 years. So usually House members are always, or what we call Congress people, are always running for office because they have very short terms. But there are no term limits. That was a key term for our California politics, or is a key term. In the U.S. federal government, there are no term limits other than to the president. So you can keep running for Senate or Congress or the House as many times as you want until you're dead or you can't win another election. And if you lose an election, you can come back and run again. There's nothing stopping you from doing those things. And then here's this really important kind of emphasis here. Each state is guaranteed at least one seat in the House of Representatives, and that'll come back when we talk about the presidency and the Electoral College. Right. Here's a really important point. In 1929, Congress agreed to permanently cap the number of seats in the House at 435. So since then, there have not been more Congress people. So again, when we do the census, they have to readjust this 435, right? So it seems like, I think from this last information, California may lose a congressional seat. Meaning a lot of people have left the state and gone to places like, say, Texas. And so then because people have then moved to Texas, maybe Texas gains a seat. But you never have a total of the 50 states more than 435. Now, redistricting occurs. That's what I'm talking about. So a process I just discussed is redistricting or redrawing voting borders of a district that will vote for one particular congressperson. So usually, as our population grows, these voting boundaries change and encapsulate more people over time, right? So generally, still is the trend. The United States is gaining people overall. Kids. You have kids. I'm not going to explain how you have kids, right? The boundaries of legislative districts are redrawn as needed to maintain similar numbers of voters in each while maintaining a total number of 435. That's from 407. And again, what's interesting is I think I've probably said this before already, but there are states that have less people in them. Like Wyoming, I think is the least populated state. Than California has in one congressional voting district, which is weird, right? So it's like if that whole state, and many of them are large in terms of landmass, were in California, it wouldn't even have enough people to have one congressperson represented, but they still get one congressperson if they're a state. I know it's kind of confusing. Make sure we know that difference. The House has a stronger House leadership structure than the Senate. The short 2-year terms tend to make the House more partisan, right? Because people aren't going to be there for long, so it's like you have less to lose or to compromise, and so you can be much more rigid in your ideological bent. So that makes sense, right? When you see someone like, say, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's just like about as partisan and in politics as you can get, she doesn't have to even compromise with, say, someone like Nancy Pelosi because she's, first of all, her district's much smaller than, say, an entire state or the country, and there's less, you kind of have to do that to stand out to win these elections. And so in the Senate, you represent a whole state, which has more diversity than, say, a district is going to have, right? So you have to be like more kind of generally appealing. So again, this is Nancy Pelosi. This is some just information about her. And she's the Speaker of the House. So you want to know who she is. She's arguably the most powerful woman in the world right now as of the recording of this video. And kind of know some of the things the Speaker of the House is in charge of doing, right? So it's a position. It's not just given to Democrats. So it's whatever party is in the majority in the House of Representatives, they will in some manner pick or vote for, essentially, in the actual elected members themselves, who will be the Speaker of the House. So it's a very political position. You kind of campaign for it in a kind of abstract way, again, not with the people of the country, but with other Congress people in the House of Representatives. And they're very, very important, right? So they're second in line of presidential succession. So if the VP were to pass away or something, or be incapacitated, and the president was incapacitated, then the Speaker of the House would then essentially assume the role of the presidency. This is where they become really important, right? They assign bills to committees. So, you guys figure this out, do the groundwork, do the investigations, or the subcommittees, who are going to be on those committees when a bill gets passed gets a floor vote. So when is everyone going to vote on it? And then, again, she appoints members and chairs to committees. And the Congress and the Senate have their own rules, which we don't study. It's a little more nuanced. I don't know them. But following those rules, like, she's able to do these appointments, which are very, very political because, if you're a chairperson, I think at the end I even have this, these committees are very, very important, and different committees are more important than others, or you get more exposure, let's say, especially if you have future political aspirations, right? So say you wanted to run for president. You want to be in a committee that has to do with international affairs. Well, why is that? Because really, once you have taken this class and you've mastered all these things and you all pass, you realize that really what the president's most responsible for is foreign and international affairs. So if I can, in 20, 30 years, go, hey, I was on that committee. I did this or this. I know all these kinds of things about how international affairs works, right? I'm bolstering my political credentials to run for different offices. And also money, right? So companies and corporations are going to be more interested in certain kinds of things, right? So companies that make military equipment might be more inclined to interact with you if you're on a military committee, right? And say, hey, support us, we'll support you. So then we get to the U.S. Senate. The Senate is the upper house of the Congress. This means that it has constitutional responsibilities that tend to impact the entire country. And I think I've already kind of rambled on about that, so hopefully that makes sense. So because it's like a more general kind of representation, then the Congress or the founders set it up so the Senate would deal with these more kind of like national issues. This is a result of the equality of representation that the Senate is meant to embody, whereas the House reflects proportional or population-based representation. Right? So there are issues that might affect every state equally, regardless of, say, population, if that makes sense. So, like issues about, say, the military. Every state has an interest in being defended by the military, regardless if there's 700,000 people in that state or 40 million people in that state. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. If not, ask me a question. Right? There are more people that live in the more people that live in a state, the more political power. So it's talking about the House. This is not true in the case of the Senate. Each of the 50 states has equal representation, and if you don't know, right, they get 2 senators per state. To serve in the Senate, a person must be a citizen for at least 9 years and be of at least 30 years of age. So I can qualify for that now. I'm old. Election for the Senate seat are held every 6 years. So a term in the Senate is 6 years. President is 4 years. Congress is 2, or the House is 2 years. There are no term limits. Again, you can lose and come back and win. And each state is guaranteed at least 2 senators. Now that there are 50 states in the union, there are currently 100 senators. State legislatures are what used to vote for the Senate. So that's really important. And the 17th Amendment changed that. So really know that. It should have been a question on the midterm. And it might be a question on the final. So what does that mean? You have the California Assembly and California Senate. Those people would have voted who the federal senator would have been, not us, right? So we all voted for, not necessarily for, but we all voted when, say, Kamala Harris was our senator, and Barbara Boxer and Dianne Feinstein were the senators before that, right? Because a senator represents the people of an entire state, senators tend to be more moderate, so we kind of already touched on that. Really kind of interesting, is important to note, is that actually the vice president is actually technically the president of the Senate, right? So other than replacing the incapacitated president, the VP only casts tie-breaking votes, which does happen, right? Because it's an even number. And yeah, remember the vice president, which we'll talk about, really isn't that important. And then depending on how a president used them. So obviously, Vice President Pence has done a lot for President Trump, but that's really up to President Trump to make that decision. And Joe Biden did stuff for President Obama before that, right? That was really up to President Obama. If he didn't really like Joe Biden, he could have made Joe Biden just do nothing or not included him in politics. Majority leaders, this role that we're interested in with the Senate. Whatever party holds the majority of seats in the Senate then decides who the majority leader will be, and they very much act similarly to the Speaker of the House. And again, these kind of main important powers assign people to committees and then decide when things get a vote or don't get a vote, right? So it's really powerful. And then right now it's Mitch McConnell. He's a senator from Kentucky. That's what Mitch McConnell looks like. That's the picture there. So takeaway for Congress generally, we have a political party leadership, and membership controls the actions of Congress, right? Remember, there's nothing in the Constitution that says we have to have political parties, but Since we do, they kind of take this leadership role. So it's not that it's in the Constitution, but they're able to do it because it's not in the Constitution, if that makes sense. There's nothing saying they can't do it. 2/3 of both the houses must agree to overturn a presidential veto, so that's an important note to keep in mind as a check on power. A key power that Congress has is the key power is to introduce and pass legislation. So again, this is like their most important kind of ability that they have. And again, this is especially when it comes to, say, taxes and raising money. And we can see their powers is divided into like 3 aspects in the Constitution. So you guys, I won't run through all this, but you want to know what enumerated powers are. So these are the ones written down. The difference between, say, an implied powers, and you guys can read some of this. And then there are inherent powers. So the book spends a lot of time talking about this and giving examples. An inherent power is controls borders of a state, the power to expand a territory, right? So it's like there's nothing in the Constitution that talks about, say, buying Alaska from the Russians, but we're able to do it because it's kind of an inherent power, which is different than, say, an implied power. So you guys want to make sure you know the difference between those 3 kinds of powers. I won't spend much time on that. The House can impeach a president, which happened with President Trump. It happened to President Clinton before that. So Trump being a Republican and Clinton being a Democrat. The Senate has the final say on many presidential nominations. That goes back to their kind of like more national interest. So like when there's treaties signed, the Senate ratifies that because that kind of affects the whole country. They also approve cabinet members and judicial appointments. So that's why when the new Supreme Court justice gets appointed, it goes through the Senate, not the House. Because it kind of having a Supreme Court justice impacts the entire country, not just, say, Palm Desert of a state like California. We get to these models of representation. There's less here. I'll actually spend more time on it. So again, we have delegate, trustee, and political. You want to know those. So it's like how you want your Congress people to behave. So a delegate model basically says they're only supposed to do what the people want them. Whatever the people wanted, the values that people shared and kind of like were able to communicate with them, those are the values that they should do. So if you go, I voted for my delegate to be pro-gun or pro-choice, then if they were not to do that, you'd be upset and you wouldn't vote for them again. But then there are other things where you just don't know a lot of things. This is a trustee model. So you're basically saying, hey, I don't know, as a citizen, I'm not an expert what to do. I trust you to make decisions. And so like with treaties or things like that, you might go, I trust them. I don't know the ins and outs of tax law. I'll trust the legislature to do this. And then you have the political model, Politico. Sorry, there's like actually a website called Politico. It means a mixture of both. So sometimes they're a delegate, sometimes they're a trustee. And then we get to the committee stuff. There's a lot of discussion of that in the books. I would let you please read through that, know why committee chairs are so important. So we have here, committee chairs are very powerful. They control the committee's budget and choose when the committee will meet. They hold hearings they hold hearings. You got to read these things correctly. Or whether it will consider a bill at all in the first place. And so I just got confused myself. So they kind of act like a mini Speaker of the House or a mini Majority Leader, and that's from page 433. And then here we have a picture of the Ways and Means Committee, and this is really important. It kind of raises the money of the country and taxes, so the ways and means in which we're going to pay for stuff, basically. And so this is arguably like one of the most powerful committees in the Congress. So like again, who's one of the most powerful people in the world? Well, I probably should put a picture. Whoever's the chairperson right now would be a Democrat. So the chairs are always going to be whatever party's in control. So you just kind of go through all that information. That does it for this video. We got a couple, several more to do. We're almost done. And so again, make sure you're asking questions, make sure you're emailing me, and hopefully you guys all have a good rest of your day after you watch this. So adios.